vou presentar en inglés porque a presentación, as slides que foron preparadas maioritariamente por Julio están en inglés. Creo que vai ser máis fácil quedar nunha lingua só. So thank you very much for the invitation. As Maria was saying, this is joint work with Julio, who is here today. This is most likely his job mark paper. And it's fair to say that we have done most things together in the paper, but the whole statistical analysis is made by him, and he's definitely better prepared to answer technical questions in the area of the results of the paper. Then it's also joint work with Sebastián Schaber, Dave Ixon, Tavares, and Adeusi Mendonça. The motivation for this paper, apart from, we all know that in theory, market efficiency is based on the assumption that agents are well informed, but when markets are not geographically concentrated, so this is producers or market participants are dispersed or are not well connected due to barriers such as infrastructural barriers, lack of access to technology, producers may not be well informed. So our research question was that, say, in such a context, the timely communication of price and market information might benefit producers' economic performance, and specifically prices and the revenue they obtain from their market transactions. Now, to study this, we implemented a two-level cluster randomized control trial in Guinea-Bissau, randomly assigning a market information system through push calls. This is calls that subscribed producers receive in their phone, SMS, and an interactive voice response system. Basically, producers can call whenever they want to a phone number and they listen to this weekly message again. Preview of results, treated producers, after having access to the service, they sell earlier, more frequently, and larger quantities relative to the controlling spillover group. Treated group does not sell at higher prices relative to others, but when we control for between village spillovers, we do find that the treatment increased price. And by selling a higher amount, the producers obtain a marginally higher revenue relative to the control group, plus 20%. Now, contributions to the literature. We show that information frictions can affect producers' choice of when to sell, the timing of their sale. Previous literature was showing that information frictions could affect where to sell, but as we will see, our producers don't travel for selling, so the main dynamics are in relation to the timing of sales. And it was also shown before that credit and storage frictions can also affect the timing of sales. And we also provide the first study delivering marketing advice using audio recorded messages via mobile phones. And this may overcome difficulties encountered by previous interventions that were based on SMS. As we will see, this was particularly important in our context because a big proportion of the producers with which we work cannot read. The previous literature on market information system for agricultural producers found positive effects or heterogeneous or no effects. So what has not been found in the literature until now are negative effects from informational interventions. And we also provide evidence of within and between village spillovers of the effects of this information, exploiting a countrywide randomization for the between village spillovers, control producers that are closer to more treated producers, even if they are in different villages, they obtain higher prices. So we had evidence on spatial between cluster spillovers of similar interventions in line with these two recent papers in the literature. Now, in the outline, after the motivation, I'm going to give the context in more detail, the described intervention, then we are going to see the design of the experiment, and finally, we'll conclude with the results. The context is the raw cashew nut market in Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau is a big producer. It's typically the 5th or 6th largest producer of this crop in the world, and the second in Africa, even when it's a quite a small country, similar in size to Galicia. But it's still a price taker in the world market of raw cashew nuts, meaning that it cannot influence the world prices. And this might be surprising for some of us. Raw cashew nuts account for 90% of Guinea-Bissau's export revenue and about 25% of GDP. More than 80% of production goes into exports. This means that about half of the population have in the sale of raw cashew nuts their main source of revenue, their main economic activity. And as we will see, price volatility across and within seasons is not well communicated to producers. The government typically has an annual reference price that might be closer or farther away from the market equilibrium price, but this is the main source of information about prices in this market. And as we can see, the prices are volatile. They are particularly volatile in recent years. Here we have, what is here? Here we have the year. Here is the prices in francs per kilo. The upper series is the export price that we have seen increased substantially towards 2017, and now is coming back to lower levels. And here is the farm gate price, which is the price that producers receive. And together with the strong volatility in recent years, something that is important is that the gap between the two prices that should be relatively stable, because the costs are relatively stable across years, is quite volatile. So this volatility in the size of the gap is a signal of important inefficiencies in this market. And there is also important variability within season for the price. So we see the export price in recent seasons has been quite stable across the same season, but the farm gate price are volatile. They change substantially, and this is generally associated with the inefficiencies in the market being stronger towards the end of the season than towards the end. For example, in the start of the season, producers are short of liquidity. There is also a lack of credit for intermediaries and exporters. So arguably less competition in the market, and there might also be less quality information when the season is starting. Now, our intervention in this context was to introduce a new market information system. And Calo, this was working in all of West Africa, except for Guinea-Bissau, because the world expert on cashew markets, the NGO Untitled, is French-speaking, and they had not managed to get into the Guinea-Bissau market. So we partnered with them to do this, and with the mobile operator MTN. And the tiling of the intervention was the following. So in November and December, of 2019, we implemented the baseline survey and the training of producers. We went to the villages to explain them how the service works. Then April to August 2020, we provided the messages that are the intervention, basically. And then April to May, we went back to the villages for the follow-up in-person survey. And the service is still running, is still moving forward. We are still coordinating it with this team of agencies. So we provided the information also in the following seasons. We are not going to present this today. That's why it's not in the list. But then January, March, we implemented a second follow-up phone survey that we are still analyzing. Here you have a picture of the poster with the cashew fruit and the cashew seed from which we extracted the cashew that is then traded internationally. We took these posters in the endline survey to the different villages. Content of the messages, they are communicated every week to producers, now annually, and they are simple. So they are synthesized and simplified news about the national cashew market. A range of the latest region-specific farm gate prices. We'll see an example now. And concrete advice on whether it is a good time to sell, based on a simple message describing the likely direction of prices. We thought this was important because it makes the information easier to interpret than if we just describe the market. So as you will see, we also tell them that we think it's a good price to sell, or that might be better to wait a few weeks, or to sell now half of the crop and wait a few weeks to sell the rest, depending on how is the evolution of the international and the national market. So the content of the messages, this will be a typical example of SMS. So the opening of the cashew season postponed because of coronavirus. Dry your nuts well to keep quality. Advice is to wait to sell until confusion is over. This was probably sold around March 2019. And this would be the example of a voice message that we put together every week. We translate it to Creole, the main language spoken nationally, and then this is sent through their phones to the subscribed producers. So this would say the following. This is André from Incalo to give you the latest news of the cashew market. The demand for cashew is increasing all over the country as factories in India and Vietnam have reopened. So this is after the coronavirus lockdown. Prices at farm gate are between 300 and 375 francos per kilo. Here you see we give the range of prices in each of the different regions and areas of the country, such that producers are informed of what is a fair price in the moment, a fair in the sense that the practiced prices. So this prevents that someone comes to a remote village and offers them 250 or 200 when the minimum prices are 300, and then they will know this. And after describing the prices in each region, then we say, as demand is growing, prices are expected to go up. So we advise not to sell before the prices reach 375 francs per kilo at farm gate. And Calo wishes you a very good week. So this could be updated with new information every week. How reliable were the messages? So this series of prices, this is the daily average price in francs along the whole season, are taken from paper diaries that we left when we visited the villages for the baseline survey with the producers. And you see how the tendency of the price has been upwards. The blue lines indicate messages that told the producers to be cautious or wait for selling, and the orange lines, messages that were indicating producers that it would be a good moment to sell their production. And you can see that the messages were accurate in this simplified description in terms of telling people to wait when prices were lower and telling people to sell when they were already higher. Now, the design of the experiment, as said, this was a clustered randomized control trial. We had 290 eligible villages, and we distributed 187 into treated villages, 103 to control villages. And within the treated villages, we split the producers into the treated ones and spillover producers that do not receive the service and are included to be able to measure the impact of having producers receiving these messages in the same village. Here we implemented the baseline survey, then the endline survey, and you see the size of the groups are comparable, and at endline we reach 86% of them. So a very good proportion. Villages have on average 30 cashew producers. For the sampling, we selected these villages with some replacement across 6 regions of Guinea-Bissau, except the islands and 2 sectors, which were least populated and accessible due to budget constraints. The sampling frame was coming from the 2009 census. We took 47 villages from each region to maximize the minimum distance between any of 2 villages, as I said before, to prevent the contagion of information as much as possible. And we consider, of course, only eligible households, and these were households who own a cashew plantation and a working mobile phone. And for the household sampling, we selected producers from a list of producers that was obtained after arriving to a village by asking the chief of the village to write the list of all the families in the village that have cashew plantations. We had 7 producers in each control village and 7 in each treatment village. 4 of them were treated and 3 untreated. Here you can see the map of the whole country. Green points are treated villages and red points are control ones. You see, we visited the whole country except for the islands, this Biombo region where we...
Brais, can we ask you a question? Can we?
Of course.
Yes,
And
it's
always.
about the selection of your sample. When you say that you select farmers with a cashew plantation is logical, but you also indicate, of course, they have to have a working mobile phone. In that regard, do you introduce any bias in your sample?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Are you aware that you are introducing any bias, given that your farmers have to have a working mobile?
Of course.
And how do you manage, or how do you think this is an issue? Is this an issue to start with?
I mean, it's not a huge issue because phone coverage is close to 100% in the country. But there might be people that don't have a working phone in that part of the year. So if there is a bias, this would be excluding kind of the less, tending to exclude a very few of the less sophisticated producers. But as said, coverage is close to 100%, so I don't have on top of my mind how many people we excluded, but this could be very, very minimal.
Okay,
because this is they are simple phones. It's not a smartphone. They are a simple phone that costs like 10 euros, and the coverage is basically national, except for some parts that don't have signal, and we didn't work there because there was not signal. So yeah, no, it shouldn't be a very important bias.
Thank you.
Here we have then in this region here, as I was saying, there's not network coverage. It's not very populated, so we couldn't work there either. But the coverage is almost fully, almost the whole country. Now, for village level stratification, we followed Fanshap's Minten, and we computed this Mahalanobis distance from a vector of distance and village level characteristics to form triplets of villages within each of the 6 regions. And then we allocate villages in triplets in each region to minimize the sum over all the triplets of the Mahalanobis distance within each triplet. The basic idea is to group the villages in triplets of most similar villages. And then within each triplet, we take these 3 most similar villages, 1 to the control group and 2 to the treatment group, such that the stratification improves the efficiency of the methodology. And for within village randomization, once we are in the village already, teams already know if the village is treatment or control. And then when they are in a treatment village, they perform an on-site lottery. They distributed little balls, little bits from a bag after the baseline survey is made between the interviewed producers, and then they are distributed into treated or non-treated. Now, I have to go back here. Now, the descriptive statistics, the sales of raw cashew nuts are the main source of income for 80% of producers in our sample. Median annual revenue for cashew sales in 2019 was 800 euros, this taken from the baseline. Nearly 98% of sales take place in the village. There were on average 2 offers received only. This is offers from buyers that offered to buy the production of these producers, and on average 1 sale during the trading season. It's difficult for them to store across seasons. That means that they basically sell their cashew nuts in the current season. They generally don't wait for the next one. Follow up in the end line, as I was saying, the response rate is 86%. It was very well balanced across treatment arms. 53% of treated producers receive at least 8 SMS messages or robocalls. So we reached with the service a big proportion of the treated producers, and by design, the service was only available in 2020 for the treated producers, so the others never got a message. People in the control group or the spillover group didn't get any message by design. Now, at baseline, respondents were 43 years old, and they had only 4 years of formal education. 5% only are women, because typically the household head is a man, and is the person that takes care of the cashew business. 30% of respondents could read a sentence without difficulties. Plot size is 3 hectares on average. 56% of respondents rely on family and friends for marketing advice, and only 6% of them belong to a cooperative. Each village has around 30 producers per village, with 36 households. We see that the majority of people in these villages, of families in these villages, own a cashew plantation, and 3 local buyers, people that live in the village and they work as intermediaries buying and selling cashew. 13 household members is the average. So on average, each family has 13 people. 30% of respondents report difficulties with storage, but this is within season storage. So they find it difficult to place their bags of cashew nuts in some place to wait to sell them later. And 32% of them report having a fixed buyer. So they sell the cashew every year to the same person for the last 3 years. Now, our estimation, IMV index individuals and villages respectively. YIV denotes the outcome of interest measured in the follow-up endline survey. Then IOIV denotes the outcome of interest for the same variable in the baseline. Treatment IV denotes individual level assignment to the treatment group. Spillover IV, individual level assignment to the spillover group in treated villages. Alpha V denotes the randomization triplet effect, fixed effect that I was explaining before. And epsilon IV is the unobserved variation in the outcome. Errors are clustered at the village level, the unit of the first randomization. Now going into the results already, we see first that the producers engage more with the service. First, we saw that they over half of them got more than 8 messages. When 1 year after the first season, when we visit the villages in the follow-up survey, we asked them, 14% of the control of the producers in the control villages had heard about Encalo, and 2 out of 1,000 say that have ever used it. Then in the treatment group, they are 30% more likely to have heard about Encalo, and about 25% more likely to say that they have used it. So given that we know that they received the messages, I think this is 1 year later, maybe some of them were a bit confused with the question or the name of the service Encalo, but still we see that the difference in the probability of knowing about it or having used it is significant, and then it's a bit higher than for control producers in the spillover group, but much less. Then the producers follow less the advice of intermediaries or other agents. Then we ask them, do you follow the advice of someone when you decide when and at which price to sell your cashew? And here we see that family and friends are the main source of advice for producers, followed by intermediaries, other sources. But for the treated group, they follow less the advice of intermediaries, which is arguably a good thing, because this is the people that buy your cashew, and also the other sources, and they follow substantially more the advice of the Encalo service. We don't see these changes affect producers in the spillover group. Let me see if I have to come back here. Yeah. In terms of the type of advice, treated producers seek advice on the best time to sell more than control producers, but this is only marginally statistically significant, and it's the only significant difference that we find. Now, treated producers sell more frequently. The number of sales is 1.5 for control producers, and it's 0.2 more sales for treated producers. When we ask them why did you sell more, say that they wanted to reduce risk. This was part of our advice, that they could reduce risk by selling into different points in time, and also explicitly that they followed Encalo service more than the control group, and also that they wanted to smooth consumption. And when we see by months, as they have sold more times, we have seen that the producers in the treatment group in the different months, they are also more likely to have sold there, which is coherent with the fact that they sold more times. And they start selling earlier in the season. Here we have the probability of them having sold in April or before. In the control group, 15% of them sold earlier. This is higher, marginally higher among the treated producers. And interestingly, they also barter later when the terms of trade are better. So there was little barter in July or after, but treated producers are a bit more likely to have bartered the cashew for rice. This is something that is very, very common in the country later in the cashew season. But we find that prices are not significantly higher for treated producers. So when we compare the distribution of prices over the number of producers, we see that there is not a clear difference, and indeed the impact of the service on price is not statistically significant, but we do find that they sold or barter, the quantity they sold or barter is bigger, and it's substantially bigger. This is about 150 kilos out of 800. That was around the average. This is almost a 20% increase compared to control producers. Difficult to explain by now. We are not really clear on where this quantity sold higher quantity sold came from, but of course it's relevant for the results. And then selling more, they made slightly more revenue. Here we have a clear increase in the revenue from sales. Here we have marginally relevant increase in the value of barters, in the exchanges they made of this cashew for the rice. And then we have marginally relevant revenue from sales and barters. That is relatively big in the dimension. And this is the results are winsorized at the 95% to prevent the impact of outliers. If we include the whole sample with the outliers, we see that this increase in revenue is substantially larger and goes up to 60,000 francs. That represents over 20% of the average revenue of producers. And then we are saying that we don't find an effect on prices, but then Julio had this very clever idea to exploit the different density of treatment and control villages in different areas of the country. With optimization algorithms, we fix this 0 to 5 kilometers buffer area around each village, and we count the number of treated producers within the circle. So as for an example, here we have a control village that does not have any treated village close to it. And around here we have control villages that have quite many treated producers in this 5 kilometers radius. So the intuition is that if there is between villages spillover of information, it should be bigger for a control producer in this village than for a control producer in this one. And this is exactly what we see in the data. We see that each treated producer within a 0 to 5 kilometers radius in column 1 increases price by 2 francs. And when we consider the interaction between treatment and having producers close to you, we see that the effect of the treatment in the spillover group becomes marginally significant, with 7 francs, about 7 francs of an increase in price, with the average price around 300. This is not huge, but then there is also an effect of having each treated producer close to you. This is valid both for treated producers in treated and control villages, and as we would expect, given that they are already treated, the gain from having treated producers close to you, it's smaller for producers in treated or spillover groups. But there is this, so we find that there is this impact on prices that was kind of hidden from the standard analysis because of the between village spillover. So as a summary of results, producers that are given access to market information change the timing and frequency of sales, as they sell when they prefer to, potentially smoothing consumption and the risk of price volatility. There is no direct effect on average farm gate prices, but we identify that this is due to between village spillovers across villages. So when we compare control and treatment villages, it seems there is not an effect on price, but when you account for this density of treated producers close to you, we see that it's good to be close to treated producers, and the service, in fact, increased average prices. And then treated producers sold a larger amount and obtained a higher revenue. This is important because I haven't said this before, but sending messages is a very low-cost intervention. So the service is now being provided by 200 francs per month, which is about 15 cents of an euro. And the impact that we find for the 2020 season in this paper is close to 90 euros per producer. So this is a very good deal for them, and it shouldn't be too difficult to make sustainable financially. Then, in terms of other outputs, we do not find evidence that treated producers change their buyers, the location of their sales, had more bargaining power, better record keeping, or different attitudes towards risk. And this is everything. Thank you very much. And don't know if I should stop sharing the screen now so we can see each other, or how do you, you like to proceed? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brais. Very interesting presentation. Now we can switch even to Spanish, Galician, etc. If anyone has a question. I have several questions. I'm going to ask them in English, so you can also help out and participate. Well, first of all, thank you. It's a very interesting project and done in very difficult conditions, so that's very interesting. I have some concerns. Let me put it this way. I find your work fascinating, but I much, how do you say, identify with some of the issues you have faced. So one of the issues that I worry about in this particular intervention is the reputation of NCALU. So if someone, initially I get a message, right, as a farmer, if I get a message, I will be worried, well, who are these guys and what is the motivation? Why are they saying to me that maybe I should wait until the prices go up to a certain amount? I will be not very comfortable with that message unless I know more, unless I know that this is a reliable source, unless I know that they are doing it because of my own convenience or this is a policy intervention, so on and so forth. So I don't know if you could elaborate a bit on that and also add that to the presentation in the sense that to show that it's a credible source for farmers. My second concern is about the treatment effect and the isolation of the treated versus non-treated. Because I work also on a different project in Africa, and I couldn't get my work published because of the following reason. I was not convincing enough to show that the non-treated were really non-treated, in the sense that, for instance, in your case, one relevant issue I think is how do you know that farmers did not re-forward the message to others, or that the message has not been passed to others orally or in other manners, right? So that's an issue that maybe you can resolve with your data and with your and knowing how the procedures you took in order to avoid that and in order to make sure that treated individuals remain clearly distinguished from non-treated individuals. So these are two questions while the audience warms up and they will come up with more ideas and thoughts. Thank you so much. Excellent work and congratulations.
Thank you. So let me ask the reputation one, and then Julio can, if he wants to, ask the one about the isolation of the treated. So reputation and trust. First, we haven't presented it here, but when we visited the village to explain the service, there was 45 minutes training for the treated producers in which they were explained how the market works with, it was like with cartoons and one of our enumerators giving them a brief course explaining how the market works in terms of supply and demand, with very simple examples comparing the cashew market in which they don't see the demand so clearly because it's an internationally traded commodity, comparing it with the tomato market within the country. And then we explained how the lack of information about these dynamics of supply and demand are important, the volatility of the price over time, and why these kind of messages could help you. They were advised to discuss them among themselves, and then we also gave them a small game with rice bags that were simulating cashew, such that they could play the game and they would receive a message. It was a game with 5 periods. They would receive a message and they would behave, sell in one or another way, depending on what they found optimal. And then there would be a little debate about how they should have interpreted these messages. And this kind of should have shown them the utility of the service for these people that were the first people in the country receiving it. Then we do measure trust. We see that trust was close to 70%, self-declared trust, of course, on the service was about 70% at baseline and close to 87-90% at endline. How much do you trust the service? So a lot, quite a lot, not so much. And then, yes, I mean, one thing that we can do in the future to increase trust in the service, to communicate these results on these impact evaluations that we haven't done by now. But from our experience and also the feedback they give when we call for service, it seems they got to trust the service quite a lot. So it doesn't seem to be a big issue.
That's good. That's very nice. Thank you. And what about the treated versus non-treated? And how do you prevent individuals from not re-forwarding the message or not talking to others? How were you able to control somewhat for that?
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Brais, for letting me answer it. So we do that in two ways. First, by design, we have randomized assignment at the cluster level. And then within those clusters, we measured outcomes on a spillover group that was also randomly allocated. And so there we do see that there are some spillover effects. So producers that are living in the same cluster or village as treated producers have sometimes different outcomes relative to the pure control producers, or at least the changes in their effects are somewhere in between the treated and the pure control. So we're not ruling out spillovers. In fact, we're showing that those do happen. But the second thing that we do, and that's the sort of the last part of the analysis that Brais was talking about, is also identifying spillovers across clusters. Now, this is still exploiting experimental variation because we are counting the number of treated producers within a specific radius, controlling for the number of villages in the study that are within that radius. And so the fact that you're a treated village or a non-treated village within that radius is random. And therefore, the number of treated producers within the region is plausibly random. So that again allows us to plausibly identify a between village spillover that is due to the spatial distribution of the treatment. And so that's where actually the final part of the presentation was actually finding that even the control group clusters, the control group producers, appear to have higher prices on average. And so that might be biasing downwards the treatment versus control comparison. And that's maybe why we don't find an average treatment effect that is positive and statistically significant. And so it is actually, the paper is actually taking spillovers as a real concern and trying to find clean ways to identify them and measure how much they matter.
Well, thank you for your answer. It's a very good design, and I'm sure that you capture the best as possible, although it's clear that you can never be 100% sure, right, that there is no additional spillovers. Emma has a question, and maybe Carlos has a question. Emma, go ahead. Feel free to ask directly.
I would like to ask a question. Why did you try? Why didn't I don't know if you did, but a spatial fixed effect model? Because you really have a spatial effects, right? So perhaps you can model them explicitly. Did you try, or somehow, or you didn't try? Because I really believe that probably you can get some sort of statistically significant spatial effects here. And to do nowadays a spatial fixed effect model is very easy to do in standard packages. It's not something that you have to program from scratch. So I don't know if you tried a spatial fixed effect model or something like that, or.
Brais, you want me to take that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So we haven't tried explicitly a spatial fixed effect model, partly because if I would worry that some of the fixed effects might actually soak up the variation in the treatment assignment at the cluster level. But and maybe I need to kind of look into exactly the method that you are suggesting to make sure that maybe I can use a larger spatial unit where there is still treatment variation. So that we haven't tried. But when we do estimate the spillover effects between villages, there we do control for spatial correlation in the error variance. So we use kind of the standard Conley 1999 spatially adjusted errors for correlation within space. So that the final table that Brais showed does account for spatial autocorrelation within the radius.
Okay, but you could model with the spatial weights. Even when having the 5 kilometers radio and things like that, you can create a matrix, right? And so you can model, even estimate a lambda parameter. I mean, to do it explicitly, I'm saying, not only allowing from robust, what you did was to get robust standard errors, right? With the Conley methodology. But okay, anyway, I like a lot of the paper, so it was only a suggestion.
No, it's a really good one. I think I probably don't know enough about those methods to answer that properly, so I will look into that. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? ¿Más preguntas? I have another one that refers to the time in which offers come in. You are maybe producers are also like risk averse, right? In the sense that they want to minimize risk of not selling their crops in the future, so that when you ask them to wait, I understand that it's kind of difficult for them to wait, because on one hand, yeah, if they wait, they will maybe getting more money, but on the other hand, if they don't, they may not be getting an offer either, because you know the demand side may be by before the peak of the season, because for particular reasons they have to change the product, they have to move it around, they have to export, and so on and so forth. So how did you, of course, this is completely random, I suppose, the demand side, and you cannot control anything there. But the demand side, what I want to say is that it has its own inertias, right? So it's rather difficult also to have stronger effects or bigger effects if the demand is when it is, and usually it may happen before the peak, because they know that if they demand before the peak, they will get, first of all, better prices. Second of all, they will assure the supply of the commodity they need. So I understand that this is beyond the scope of the work and beyond what maybe you can do, but I was wondering if you could state whether or not when is the concentration of the demand, so that, or you can say something on the demand side, so that it's clear that the producers have the degrees of freedom they have in terms of deciding when to sell, because not only price, but maybe the need to get out of the product is an additional issue that should be considered. Other things equal, I mean.
Yes, so it's a very good point. We haven't got time to include the heterogeneous effects in the presentation, but we have very rich heterogeneous effects of the treatment. And what we see is that the producers constrained in the direction you are saying. For example, producers that receive one offer in the whole season, producers that are longer from roads, producers that are more liquidity constrained, or that have problems to storage their cashew nuts, they get very little to no effect from the information. So in that sense, that's a very good point. You know, we exploit the heterogeneity in the number of offers received, and we know this at baseline, to see that producers that have a larger number of buyers, typically in a year, they get more from the service than the ones that, as you say, have to sell the day that the buyer comes to the village once a year. So we do know that. And now we are thinking about continuing the project, getting to relax some of these constraints. So maybe, you know, a list of buyers that you can send to the villages, so people can call buyers when they want to sell. We are thinking about it, but it's very, very clearly a constraint for part of our sample, but we exploit that. We know it, so we can study it.
Okay, super, thank you. I'm not sure if anyone has another comment. I see Carlos has the camera on already for a while, so I am going to give the floor to him. He is the director of ECOBAS, so maybe also he can close the session if no one else can would like to add any additional comment. Thank you so much, guys.
Maria, no, I have not any particular question. And then just to thank Brais and Julio for the presentation. Thank you very much. It was a very good presentation, very clear. I like it. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you for our side. So that was it, guys. We keep in touch for the future. Now you know about ECOBAS, and we look forward to seeing you in one of the Galician universities. Julio, you are welcome to present our work in person sometime. So thank you, and thank you, Brais, for your attention and always willingness to cooperate. So see you next week, all of you guys. We will send the information for the next seminar. So have a good weekend, and thank you for your attention.